right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today we're going to be joined by John Owning of Pro Football Focus to take a deep dive at Arnold Ebiketie and DeAngelo Malone, and also we'll be projecting what is the most optimistic Falcons pass rush that we could see in 2022.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course, the host of this world-renowned Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And we thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Locked On Falcons, of course, free and available on a variety of podcast platforms Monday through Friday, whether you're checking out Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel, and you'll get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So, guys, with that being said, we will be having a guest on. John Owning, formerly of Dallas Morning News, covers the Cowboys, pass rush enthusiast, maybe you can call him, currently working for Pro Football Focus. And he's going to be talking with us about Arnold Ebiketie and DAndre Malone. And John really knows his stuff when it comes to these pass rushers. We've had him on several times in the past here on Locked On Falcons. And he's one of those guys that's sort of my go-to when it comes to evaluating pass rushers. Knows his stuff. And this is all sort of leading up to, at the end of the week, the plan is Thursday night if you're checking us out on YouTube, or Friday morning if you're checking us on your preferred audio platform. But we will wrap up this week with an Arnold Ebiketie scouting report. Did Drake London on Sunday night, Monday morning, earlier this week. So we're, keeping this thing moving with these various Falcon player draft pick scouting reports. And then next week, hopefully, we'll get to Troy Anderson and possibly Desmond Ridder if all things work out for that. But without further ado, let's get into the conversation with John Owning, talking about Arnold Ebiketie and why he thinks he's one of the better pass rush prospects from this past year's draft class. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are Locked On Falcons. I am your host, Aaron Freeman, and joined by an illustrious guest. He is John Owning, editor with Pro Football Focus, formerly of the Dallas Morning News. John is one of these guys that I have. He's one of my pass rush edge guys that I have on the podcast frequently. He covers the Cowboys. And oftentimes on this podcast, we've joked on previous instances where it seems like every other year the Cowboys are chasing a certain pass rusher and the Falcons snatch him up, or the Falcons are chasing a certain pass rusher and the Cowboys wind up snatching him up. And I know the two pass rushers we're going to be talking about today in Arnold Ebiketie and DeAngelo Malone were two players that I know John was particularly high on. But John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. Really appreciate that intro. Excited to be here. Like we were saying, the two teams are somehow interconnected with these edge rushers seemingly every year. And then now we have Dan Quinn, your guys' former head coach. So it's just continuing on and forward. So I'm excited. You guys got two of my favorites.
Well, I know a lot of Falcon fans were looking at Sam Williams as a potential pickup as well. So he was a guy that went to Dallas. But let's talk about Arnold Ebiketie. The Falcons traded up into round 2 to get him. Some people thought Ebiketie would go in round 1. I'm curious. I know you're a fan of Arnold Ebiketie. What was it about his game that you really were a big fan of?
Well, first of all, I really like, just the basic frame and athleticism that he's working with. He's 6'3", 250 pounds, which isn't great, which isn't, that's kind of middling size. But then he has 34-inch arms, 10-inch hands. Then he's got the 81st percentile 40. He ran the sub 7 3-cone. All those things are nice. And then when you watch him play, he's just one of the more refined overall pass rushers in this class. I really like his ability to layer different moves together. I think he has really impressive bend, especially in this class. He has probably some of the best bend in this class. He can win outside. He can win inside. He can win through players. He varies his handwork. There's a 2-snap sequence in the Michigan game that's particularly interesting. On one snap, he goes out and he uses a long arm sharp put, which is where you put your inside arm, press it into the chest of the offensive tackle, and you use that to throw them by to win with an inside move. Well, on the very next play after that, after he beat the offensive tackle with the long arm shot put to the inside, next one he shows the long arm shot put, and then when he sees the offensive tackle anchor down for that power a little bit, and then he hit a beautiful double hand swipe right off of it, cornered and got a sack. It was just those type of snap sequences where you see that they're seeing the game from an elevated level that you don't really see a lot of collegiate pass rushers in particular do. So that just really off the top really impressed me. And then you can get into the run defense where he plays with a hot motor. He's a really good chase defender. In the NFL, he's going to have to get a little bit bigger, but in college, he showed the ability and willingness to set an edge, play through contact, stack and shed blocks. So he was just one of the guys. He was my third. I thought he was the third best edge defender in this class, and he's someone who I gave a 1-2 grade to, a first, second round grade to in this class, and just a really impressive prospect who I'm very jealous that you guys grabbed.
Now, I haven't. The Michigan game is the last game I'm going to watch on film probably later today, as we're talking here. But I haven't gotten to that game yet. But he checks a lot of the boxes that you're looking for in a pass rusher. The one box that I wasn't necessarily convinced watching several of his games that he was checking as consistently as you want was the sort of power element in his game. You would see certain instances where he would be able to effectively use power. Do you think that's a concern from what you saw of Arnold Ebiketie? Because when I look at some of the top pass rushers, they can win with both speed and power. And if you're sort of, I don't want to call it one note or whatever the case may be, but if you veered probably far to one side of that spectrum, maybe it can be a little bit of a limiting factor against certain tackles. I'm curious, where do you sort of land on Ebiketie's power? Was it adequate for you? Was it exceptional for you, or deficient, whatever the case may be?
I think definitely for NFL standards, it's probably below average. He's not going to be somebody who's going to win as a traditional bull rusher who's going to rush with two hands straight, put his head into the chin of the offensive tackle and just press them and walk them back into the quarterback. But he has an ability to win with power off his speed. He can convert speed to power pretty well. He has good techniques where he can feint power to go to speed. He has I think that's the root of a lot of his issues coming into the NFL and against the run too, is he's going to lack the play strength that is necessary to really be an every down player from day one. But I think he has the technical efficiency that once he adds that strength, maybe gets to the high 250s, maybe even low 260s weight wise, and still stays lean, stays in shape. I think he'll be able to bring enough of the power element to his game that he'll be able to all the rest of the traits that he's so good at, the inside moves, the outside moves, the hand techniques, the footwork. Those will be able to flourish because he'll be able to at least offensive tackles will at least have to respect his power, even though that's not the primary means that he's going to ever win.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it. So guys, we still got more to come talking about Arnold Ebiketie's player comparison, and John is particularly familiar with this particular player as a Dallas Cowboys pass rusher that I think Arnold Ebiketie compares favorably to. We'll also talk about DeAngelo Malone and what John sees in him as we continue today's episode, guys. But before we get there, I want to let you know about Built Bar, the proud sponsor of today's Locked On Falcons podcast. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar. It's even better than a candy bar because Built Bars not only taste good, they're good for you. They're low in sugar, low in calories, low in carbs, high in protein, high in fiber. They come in a variety of different flavors. I just got a order of the birthday cake puff. Been mopping those. They got the brownie batter puff, the banana cream pie puff as well. And you're probably listening. It's like, what, these don't sound healthy, but they are healthy for you guys. Treat yourself to an indulgent, healthy treat. Birthday cake, brownie batter, banana cream pie. And the birthday cake in particular, white chocolate, sprinkles, Every day can be a birthday for you, and sort of, you want to get geared up for, the summer and have food on the go when you're out on vacation and when you're out hiking, when you're at the beach, whatever the case may be, Built Bar can provide it. And all you got to do is go to built.com right now, use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, for 15% off at built.com. One last question on Arnold Ebiketie before we move on to talk about DAngelo Malone. I'm going to do my scouting report later this week on Arnold Ebiketie, and I'm looking for some player comps, and I feel you're probably the perfect person to ask this question. One comp that I'm leaning towards is maybe DeMarcus Lawrence, a guy that kind of wins more with length and speed and bend necessarily than a guy that's going to win fully with power. Where do you feel on that comp with DeMarcus Lawrence?
I think it's a good comp for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, no comp's perfect. If you want to nitpick things, there are things they both do that are extremely different. But I think from an overall general, just if you were going to do like a macro view of each player, it's very similar. They're both fantastic chase defenders against the run. They both play with an extremely hot motor. They both thrive with hand techniques. They both have Ebiketie's definitely a better athlete, but they both utilize more often subtle footwork and integrated hand technique to beat offensive tackles rather than pure physical traits. Like, you don't see Ebiketie or Lawrence just getting in a sprinter's hands and just blowing right by offensive tackles with their pure speed, like you see like Nick Bonito do consistently in college. So I think from a macro sense, I would definitely agree with that comp. They're very similar players that in some ways they go about doing it a little bit differently, but generally they're very, very similar in their impact. I think if Ebiketie reaches the higher end of his spectrum as DeMarcus Lawrence has, he'll have a similar impact to what D-Law would have, and that's a damn good edge defender.
There you go. All right. Well, I feel better about potentially making that comp a little bit later in the week now that you've sort of signed off on it somewhat on that one. But let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about DeAngelo Malone, another player that I know you were high on as sort of a good mid-round pick. The Falcons were able to snag him at the end of round 3. Malone is more, I guess you kind of mentioned Nick Bonito. To me, he seems more of that sort of pure speed guy that can, potentially blow past offensive linemen with his sort of first step quickness. What's your sort of assessment on Malone as a pass rusher?
Yeah, the interesting adjective that always pops in my head when I'm watching him is he's a really bouncy pass rusher. He's kind of like jumping in and out. He loves the work that kind of talking about DeMarcus Lawrence, kind of that hopping cross chop. He likes to use his hands really well. He has impressive bend. I was really impressed with him at the Senior Bowl. That's where I first saw him. He first popped on my radar, because I'm not really watching Western Kentucky football. I don't know about you.
No, every Saturday.
Yeah, I'm not really checking them out. So I didn't really know who
yeah.
he was coming into the week, and then coming out of the week, I certainly knew who he was because he was definitely one of the most effective pass rushers. And as a mid-round guy, I think he has the baseline tools that can develop into somebody who's an effective I think he's definitely going to need to stay in a pass rush kind of specialist role, pass rush specialist role. He's not going to really thrive as a run defender because he doesn't really play that strong. He's not really that developed in working through different blocking schemes and all those types of things. But I really like his baseline traits. I think he knows how to use his hands. He knows how to set up people with his footwork. He knows how to win. He knows how to there's kind of like 3 different ways to beat an offensive tackle. There's either you can initiate contact with them, you can parry the contact that they're trying to get, like swipes, chops, those type of things, or you can kind of move out of the way of their strikes. You can kind of slip it like a boxer, like a Floyd Mayweather. Nick Bonito did that really well. Von Miller does that really well with a patented ghost move that's making its name known throughout the NFL. He can win he has shown the ability to win with all 3 different ways, but all 3 different ways just need further refinement, further strength, further experience in the NFL. That's why I think as a mid-rounder, someone who can just come in and give you 10 to 15 pass rush snaps a game, I think he's going to be excellent. Someone who can develop further into someone who, can be a 6 to 8 sack a year type of guy who's winning, 15 to 18% of his pass rush snaps per season.
Well, John, I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your insights on these two Falcon pass rushers. I'll let you go ahead and plug, some of the stuff that you're working on over at Pro Football Focus.
Yeah, you guys just come over to pff.com, sign up a membership, do all that fun stuff. Follow me on Twitter at John Owning, JOHNOWNING, as you see on the screen. Just follow me there. That's where all my Cowboys content, pass rusher content is, even some Marvel content. So we're having fun.
Look, man, I got the Marvel shirt on too.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. So, yeah, man, go check out John. He does a lot of great breakdowns of pass rushers, a lot of Cowboy stuff, but you get a lot of great information on his Twitter feed and whatnot. And that's why he's one of my go-to guys when it comes to edge rushers. We had him on way back in the day, and he was talking up a storm about Vita Vea. And if only, that
good old days.
Yeah, man. I've seen that man wreck this offensive line far too many times. So, you sort of gave us a little bit of a heads up on how he was going to be a problem, and will continue to be a problem. But John, I really do appreciate you coming back on Locked On Falcons. I'm sure we'll probably be doing this again next year when inevitably, the Falcons and Cowboys are chasing the same sort of pass rushers, because perpetually these two teams are looking to get better up front.
For sure. 100%. Can't wait, my man. Really appreciate it.
So, guys, there's still more to come on today's episode, and we'll be talking about the sort of best case scenario for the Falcons pass rush this season. Looking at sort of, what could we see from Grady Jarrett and Lorenzo Carter and Arnold Ebiketie this season as far as the Falcons' top three pass rushers go, and sort of how much improvement could we possibly get if all of those guys sort of hit their potential this season. We'll get into that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons podcast. But before we get there, guys, I want to let you know about Bet Online. Whether you're into Major League Baseball, NBA playoffs, boxing, UFC, golf, NHL playoffs, esports, favorite Vegas casino games, Bet Online is the #1 source for all your sports betting needs and info. You can find the latest odds, player props, and contests. BetOnline.net has it all. And if you're not necessarily into those sports and you're a football junkie, like I'm sure many of you are out there, you can go to BetOnline and put in props for this upcoming NFL season. If you think the Falcons will win more or less than 4.5 wins, do you think Birmingham is going to go all the way in the USFL? Right? You can bet on football today rather than football tomorrow. Or you can sit there and bet on comeback player of the year, and that's potentially Marcus Mariota with 14-1 odds. If you feel good about Marcus Mariota surprising folks like myself, negative Nancy's like myself, and going out there and putting on a show this year, you can bet on that as well. So head on to the website for the latest trends in action. Bet Online, where the game starts. So, guys, let's talk about the Falcons, pass rush potential this year. And this is not meant to be a realistic calculation of what the Falcons pass rush will be this year. This is an optimist, right? We're turning a new page here on Locked On Falcons, and we're being optimistic. And right now, we don't really know who the 4 main Falcons pass rushers will be. We can assume Grady Jarrett will be one, Lorenzo Carter will be another, and Arnold Ebiketie, I think, are pretty safe assumptions to be 3 out of the 4 guys. But who that 4th guy is going to be when the Falcons, are out there trying to get pressure on the Tom Brady's and the Joe Burrows and the Jameis Winstons of the world remains to be seen. As far as interior rushers currently on the roster, you would assume Marlon Davidson or Taquan Graham would be 2 young players that are potentially poised to step up, but we know they weren't necessarily productive last year in their limited opportunities. And so I can't really imagine the Falcons are fully committed to just rolling those 2 guys out there as the sort of main running mate with Grady Jarrett on the interior. And so that's part of the reason why I will continue to believe that, some defensive line signing is potentially on the horizon between now and the start of training camp. And we'll just sort of have to see about that. But we'll leave that aside and focus on these top 3 guys and sort of what's the best case scenario for what these 3 guys can produce, let alone, who that 4th guy will be. And let's start with Grady Jarrett. Looking at his projections last year, he had 527 pass rush snaps Let's assume that in 2022 he has the same number of snaps. And if you look at Grady Jarrett's best season when it comes to his pressure rate, according to Pro Football Focus, it was 2018 when he got pressure on about 11% of his pass rushing snaps. And if he was to repeat that with, this snap count this year, that would be a career high 60 pressures for Grady Jarrett, which would exceed the 57 that was his previous career high that he set in 2020. And if you look at his best sack conversion rate, that's, how many sacks relative to how many pressures he gets. That was in 2019 where he had 8 sacks on 46 pressures. And that translated over 60 pressures this year would equal 10 and a half sacks this year. And that would basically have him with 2022 production comparable to what we saw from guys like Jeffrey Simmons and Cam Hayward in 2021. And that's massive improvement for the 36 pressures and the 1 sack that we saw from Grady Jarrett a year ago. When it comes to Lorenzo Carter, his best season in terms of pressure rate was this past year with the New York Giants, where he got pressure on about 10.5% of his pass rush snaps. And his best sack conversion rate came in 2019, where he had 6 sacks on 35 pressures. And so the question, of course, when we're projecting what Lorenzo Carter could do this year is how many snaps is he going to get here in Atlanta? And it's hard to say. If we assume that he replaces, Steven Means' role in the Falcons lineup, Steven Means had 314 pass rush snaps across 14 games. So over 17 games, that would be about 380 roughly pass rush snaps. But then if you look at Dante Fowler and his workload, he had about 306 pass rush snaps over 14 games. But what's interesting about Dante Fowler is he started off at a much higher rate. He was on pace. If you just look at the first 4 games of the season, he was on pace to have like 514 snaps. Then he got hurt in that Week 5 Jets game. And then the Falcons kind of dialed back his workload for the rest of the season. And over the first month of the season, he was averaging about 30 pass rush snaps a game. And then for the rest of the season, it was about 18 pass rush snaps a game. And so if you kind of split the difference, that projects over a 17-game sample to be about 415 pass rush snaps. So let's say that's roughly what Carter will have this year. We'll use that same figure of 415 snaps for Arnold Ebiketie moving forward as well. So when we apply that to Carter and his career best, numbers, that would be about 43 pressures and about 7.5 sacks. And that's comparable to what we saw from Eagles edge rusher Josh Sweat a year ago. Looking at Ebiketie, obviously we don't have previous years of NFL experience to base our projections off of. So let's just kind of look at, rookie year production for first round edge rushers taken over the past 12 years. I've done that data. And we're using first rounders because, we believe that, Ebiketie was a first round talent. Again, this is the best case scenario when we're talking about that. I do have the data for second round edge rushers, but essentially the way it worked out doing the research is like a 90th percentile second rounder is basically like a 75th percentile first rounder. So if we say he's one of the best second rounder pass rushers ever, that would be a high end first rounder essentially. So if we're losing that 75th percentile first rounder for Ebiketie, assuming that he's, one of the well above average first round talent, and as John previously said, had him top 3 in this draft class, that seems, given that we're being optimistic today, that seems, like a pretty safe assumption, the 75th percentile. And using that 75th percentile, Ebiketie, given this 415 snap workload, would wind up this year with about 50 pressures and 10 sacks. That's certainly possible if he hits the 75th percentile in terms of pressure rate and in terms of sack conversion rate. And that's comparable to what Ryan Kerrigan did in that 2011 season, his rookie season, where I think he had about like 54 pressures and like 11 sacks or something like that on maybe like 450 snaps. And, that was a really good number for that year, but it got outclassed. That would be one of the better rookie seasons we've seen from an edge rusher taken in the first or second round in the last, 10, 12 years. But that 2011 draft class was stacked. Von Miller, Alden Smith at that time had like basically historic rookie seasons in terms of their pass rush production. And you also had really good seasons from Adrian Claiborne, Jabbar Sheard, who was a second round pick, Robert Quinn as well that year. So we're hoping that this 2022 rookie class in terms of edge rushers, which many people thought this 2022 draft was pretty strong at the edge rushers, can kind of stack up similarly where Ebiketie, if he's a top 3 guy, can put up production like Kerrigan, who was technically a top 3 guy relative to that 2011 draft class in terms of edge rushers. So if we're assuming this is the best case scenario for all three of these pass rushers, we're combining them to get 153 pressures in 28 sacks. And we know that's massive improvement from what, this team had last year when their top three pass rushers were Grady Jarrett, Steven Means, and Dante Fowler in terms of workload. And those guys combined for 77 pressures and 6 sacks. So we're basically doubling the pressures, 98% or 99% increase. And we're more than almost quadrupling the sack production, which is a 376% increase. And we compare that to a team like the Bengals, who we've talked about previously on the podcast earlier this offseason when it came to trying to improve this Falcons pass rush, because the Bengals were the league worst pass rush in 2020 when they had 17 sacks, similar to what the Falcons had as a league worst 18 sacks in 2021. But we saw that Bengals team make significant investments in their pass rush that offseason that paid off for them, because they jumped from dead last to 11th or tied for 11th in terms of sacks in 2021 with 42 sacks. And they added Trey Hendrickson and BJ Hill and Larry Ogunjobi. They got a healthy DJ Reader back, all that various stuff. And so when you look at their top three pass rushers in 2020, when they were the worst pass rush in the NFL, those three guys were Carl Lawson, Sam Hubbard, and Christian Covington. They combined for 106 pressures and 9 sacks in 2020. Hubbard, Ogunjobi, and Hendrickson combined for 170 pressures and 33 sacks. So in this case, when we're talking about the best case scenario for the Falcons, with all these three guys having career years, Jarrett, Carter, and relatively speaking, Ebiketie, that's a 99% increase, which is significantly more than the improvement that the Bengals showed this past year, where in terms of pressure, the Falcons would improve 99%. The Bengals only improved 60%. When it came to sacks, the Bengals improved 267%, and the Falcons were projecting or improving by a lot more than that, 376%. So as I said earlier, this is not necessarily, I think, realistic, because I think the Bengals, as far as I think we did an episode earlier, and the Bengals had one of the best turnarounds from one year to the next in terms of, being one of the worst pass rushers in the league to making improvement. And so it's probably not realistic to think that the Falcons, at least their top three rushers, will be able to facilitate that type of improvement. But I think probably a more realistic expectation, is maybe like 40% improvement for the Falcons. If you're assuming maybe triple the sack production, between Carter, Ebiketie, and Jarrett, if all three of those guys get somewhere between 35 and 40 pressures this year and 5 to 7 sacks, which I think is realistic. I think all those guys are capable of producing at that level. That would be significant improvement for the Falcons. Maybe not quite to the same degree that the Bengals showed, but that would be a competent pass rush if we're talking about, 100, 120 pressures between these three guys and, 15 to 20 sacks between these three guys. So I think that's probably realistic, and we'll sort of see if the Falcons can live up to that billing. And obviously we'll sort of see, who else can emerge among this Falcons pass rush, whether it's DAngelo Malone, whether it's Marlon Davidson, Taquan Graham, or, some as of yet added player that the Falcons will pick up in the next couple of months. So we'll see. I think the Falcons pass rush will be better. I don't know if the Falcons pass rush will be good, but we'll just sort of see about that as we continue things. And certainly probably as we get closer to training camp, we can kind of hone in, okay, where exactly are we expecting a realistic expectation for this Falcons pass rush in 2022. So that will do it for us here, guys. And want to thank John Owning for joining me on today's episode to talk a little bit more about these pass rushers. I don't quite know what tomorrow's episode will be. Maybe we talk about some of the things that Arthur Smith said last week on the podcast. I will be recording with a guest, but I don't know when that episode will air. It'll kind of be depending on what that person says, and if there are things that I think are applicable that are worth mentioning now, or will I just sort of save that for future episodes when we're talking about other players in this Falcons 2022 draft class. So we'll see about that. But, that's an opportunity for you guys to submit questions for a possible mailbag in the sort of middle of the week. And of course, you can do so by hitting me up on Twitter or Facebook at Locked On Falcons, via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com, or you can leave a comment here on the Locked On Falcons YouTube page. So, guys, really appreciate you joining me for another episode of Locked On Falcons. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube so that you can check out the Thursday night Arnold Ebiketie scouting report when it goes live at some point, probably between 7 and 9 p.m. Eastern time, which is usually when the episodes premiere on the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. So subscribe, hit that bell, make sure you get those notifications and all that various stuff, or, make sure you tune in and subscribe to Locked On Falcons on your preferred audio podcast platform so you can catch it, at midnight Eastern time, the minute it drops on the audio platforms, or when you're getting up and taking the kids to school or driving to work or whatever the case may be. So that's the plan for the rest of the week, guys. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Appreciate it. Till then.